What's up, bosses, and welcome back to Boss Economic World. The only show that cuts through the noise, debunks the jargon, and tells you what's really driving the money train. Today, we're unpacking a story that, on the surface, looks like a geopolitical dating app. You know the one, two profiles who had a very public, very messy breakup suddenly match again. Swipe left, swipe left, swipe left, wait, you again? Swipe right? I'm talking about India and Canada. The headlines today, November 14, 2025, are all aglow. A joint statement. A new beginning. They're partnering on critical minerals, clean energy, and aerospace. It's all handshakes and photo ops. But hold on. Weren't these the two countries that were basically in a diplomatic MMA cage match just 2 years ago? Let's hit the rewind button. The year is 2023. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stands up in Parliament and publicly accuses the Indian government of orchestrating the assassination of a Sikh separatist leader on Canadian soil. Boom. Diplomatic bombshell. India's Prime Minister Modi fires back, denying everything and accusing Canada of being a safe haven for extremists. Diplomats are expelled, angry words are exchanged, and a multi-billion-dollar trade deal is thrown into the deep freeze. The relationship wasn't just rocky, it was a full-blown Arctic expedition. So what happened? Did they go to couples counseling? Did they suddenly discover a shared love for maple syrup-drenched naan? No. The answer, as it so often is in our crazy economic world, is a four-letter word. And that word is Trump. That's right. The unlikely, and frankly, unwilling, Cupid in this entire drama is the 47th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, and his America First 2.0 economic policy. To understand why India and Canada are suddenly best friends, you have to understand the economic pain that Washington has been inflicting on both of them. Let's unpack this. This is the real story. When Donald Trump returned to the White House, he didn't just bring back the old playbook, he supercharged it. The guiding philosophy is simple: the world is a zero-sum game, and the US will use its massive consumer market as a weapon to get what it wants. First, let's look at India. India, under Modi, has been playing a very clever geopolitical game. They're part of the Quad with the US, Japan, and Australia to counter China. But they also maintain a historically strong relationship with Russia. They walk the tightrope. Well, President Trump doesn't do tightropes. He saw India continuing to buy large quantities of Russian oil, often at a discount. While the previous administration might have used nuanced diplomacy, Trump reached for his favorite tool, the tariff hammer. He singled out India and, citing unfair trade practices and support for rogue states, slammed them with a crushing 50% tariff. Now, this wasn't just some symbolic gesture. The statement from the prompt says it hit more than half of Indian exports to the US. Let's put some real numbers on that. In the years leading up to this, India's annual exports to the US were hovering around 90 billion. Hitting more than half of that means slapping a 5,045 billion worth of goods. Think about that. For Indian manufacturers of textiles, pharmaceuticals, gems, and auto parts, their single biggest market suddenly became a financial minefield. A 50% tariff isn't a negotiating tactic, it's an extinction-level event for many exporters. It's the economic equivalent of a brick wall. This move has been estimated to have already shaved a full percentage point off India's projected GDP growth for 2025. That's tens of billions of dollars in economic activity vanished. So, India is bleeding. They are desperately, urgently, looking for new markets and new, reliable partners. They need to de-risk from America. Now, let's turn our gaze north to the Great White North. Canada. You'd think the US-Canada relationship, the world's longest undefended border, would be safe, right? Wrong. In late October 2025, just a few weeks ago, the Canadian government, still under Trudeau at the time, sponsored a digital ad campaign. It was a pretty tame by Canadian and fair trade message, designed to counter the narrative of Trump's tariffs. It was the kind of thing that would normally be ignored. But with Trump, nothing is normal. The US administration declared the ad a hostile and disrespectful act against the American worker. The result? Washington halted all trade talks with Canada. This included crucial negotiations on updating USMCA and resolving disputes over dairy, lumber, and digital services taxes. For Canada, an economy where over 70% of its exports go to the United States, this was a five-alarm fire. Their economic lifeline was suddenly being threatened by a thin-skinned reaction to a Facebook ad. This brings us to the political shift in Canada. The constant chaos and economic uncertainty of dealing with the Trump administration created a political opening. The public grew tired of the drama. Enter Mark Carney. For those of you who aren't finance nerds, Mark Carney is not your typical politician. This is the guy who was the governor of the Bank of Canada, and then, get this, the governor of the Bank of England. He's one of the most respected central bankers of his generation. He's the adult in the room. His campaign pitch was simple: competence, stability, and economic growth. In a world of chaos, that message resonated. He became prime minister, and his first order of business was to put out the economic fires. So now you have the setup. Two major economies, India and Canada, both members of the Commonwealth, both democracies, and both getting absolutely hammered by their largest trading partner. As the old proverb goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Or in this case, the economic antagonist of my antagonist is my new strategic partner. This joint statement isn't just fluffy diplomatic language. It's a calculated economic survival plan. Let's break down the three key pillars they announced, because this is where the real money is. Pillar 1, Critical Minerals. This is the big one. The 21st century economy runs on a handful of obscure metals and minerals. Your smartphone, the F-35 fighter jet, the battery in your electric vehicle, the wind turbine generating your power, they all depend on things like lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements. For decades, China has been playing 4D chess in this space, locking up mines and supply chains across Africa and South America. They currently process nearly 90% of the world's rare earths and a huge chunk of other critical minerals. This gives them a terrifying chokehold on the global economy. The US under Trump is obsessed with reshoring its own supply chain, but it's a slow and incredibly expensive process. Here's where the Canada-India synergy is brilliant. Canada is a geological treasure chest. It has massive, untapped reserves of lithium, nickel, cobalt, and graphite. It's one of the few Western nations with this kind of mineral wealth. But they lack the massive scale processing and manufacturing capacity. India, under its Make in India initiative, is rapidly building out its industrial and manufacturing base. They have the engineering talent, the workforce, and the ambition to build the refineries, the battery gigafactories, and the high-tech component manufacturing plants. You see the play? Canada mines it, India refines and builds with it. Together, they can create a non-Chinese, and now, non-US dependent, supply chain for the most important ingredients of the modern economy. We're talking about a market that is projected to be worth over $400 billion annually by 2030. This isn't about friendship, it's about seizing a massive economic prize that their common antagonist has forced them to see. Pillar 2, Clean Energy. This ties directly into critical minerals. But it's also about energy security. India, with its 1.4 billion people, has an insatiable appetite for energy. Canada is an energy superpower, but it's looking to transition its portfolio. The old model was Canada selling oil and gas to the US. The new model? Nuclear cooperation. Canada's Cando reactors are world-class. India has a huge and growing nuclear energy program. This deal will likely fast-track sales and technology sharing, helping India build out its zero-emission baseload power. Green hydrogen, this is the holy grail. Using Canada's abundant hydropower and India's solar potential to create hydrogen fuel. This is a long-term play, but it's a direct shot at breaking reliance on fossil fuels from Russia and the Middle East, something both countries are keenly aware of. Grid technology and storage. India needs to modernize its grid. Canadian firms are leaders in smart grid technology and large-scale battery storage solutions that, surprise surprise, use the very critical minerals they also plan to partner on. This is about creating a self-contained energy ecosystem, insulating themselves from both volatile oil prices and the political whims of energy suppliers. Pillar 3, Aerospace. This one might seem a bit more niche, but it's incredibly strategic. Aerospace is high value, high-tech, and a huge source of national pride. Canada is home to Bombardier, a global leader in business jets, and a massive ecosystem of aerospace parts suppliers. They have the legacy, the R&D, and the brand name. India has a burgeoning aerospace industry, led by giants like Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. They are building their own fighter jets, drones, and helicopters. More importantly, they offer a massive, cost-effective manufacturing base and a huge domestic aviation market. The partnership here is obvious. Canadian design and technology combined with Indian manufacturing scale and market access. Think of it as Canadian-designed parts being built in India for assembly into planes sold across Asia. This allows them to compete with giants like Boeing and Airbus without being dependent on the US supply chain, which, as we've seen, can be weaponized at a moment's notice. Okay, let's talk numbers. The joint statement says bilateral trade was $23.66 billion in 2024. That's a respectable number. The merchandise portion, at nearly $9 billion, grew by a solid 10% over 2023. A 10% jump in a year when diplomatic ties were supposedly in the freezer tells you something important. Business and economics were already pushing them together, even when the politicians were fighting. The underlying logic was already there. Now, with this new strategic alignment, sources in both Ottawa and New Delhi are talking about an ambitious new target, doubling bilateral trade to nearly $50 billion by 2030. That's not just growth, that's a structural shift in their economic orientation. But let's not get carried away. This road is full of potholes. 1. The trust deficit. The 2023 assassination issue hasn't vanished. They've agreed to an information-sharing framework to curb cross-border crime, which is diplomatic code for we'll talk about the security stuff quietly so we can get on with the money stuff. But deep-seated mistrust in the intelligence and security communities could still derail things. One more incident, and this whole house of cards could collapse. 2. The Trump factor is volatile. This alliance is forged in the fire of Trump's policies. What happens if Trump loses the next election? Or what if he suddenly decides he loves India and Canada again and drops all the tariffs? Would the strategic imperative for this partnership fade? A new US administration could try to peel Canada or India away from this alliance with a better offer. 3. Implementation is hard. It's easy to sign a statement. It's incredibly difficult to build mines, refineries, and gigafactories. These are decadal projects requiring tens of billions in capital investment. They will face regulatory hurdles, environmental challenges, and local political opposition. So, what does this all mean for you, the boss of your own economy? This India-Canada story is a perfect microcosm of the biggest economic shift of our time, the fragmentation of the globalized world. The post-Cold War era, where the US was the stable, predictable anchor of the global system, is over. We are moving into a multipolar world where countries are forming economic blocs based on necessity and shared threats, not just shared values. This is friendshoring on steroids. It's not just about moving your supply chain to a friendly country, it's about building entirely new, resilient economic corridors that bypass the unpredictable superpowers. For years, we've talked about de-risking from China. Now, for many countries, the playbook includes de-risking from the United States. They are building a global economic architecture that has redundancies, that has options, that isn't beholden to a 3 a.m. tweet or a sudden tariff tantrum. The reset between India and Canada isn't a story of forgiveness. It's a story of cold, hard, economic calculus. It's a strategic pivot born of necessity. They looked at the global chessboard, saw the chaos emanating from Washington, and realized that their best move was to team up. It's a marriage of convenience, but in this turbulent economic climate, a marriage of convenience might just be the strongest one there is. This is the new great game, and it's not being played with armies, but with supply chains, tariffs, and trade deals. And for now, two countries that were at each other's throats have decided it's better to build the future together than to face the storm alone. That's the real deal. Don't just watch the headlines, understand the balance sheets behind them.